Greetings, peace, and blessings. Shalom. I hope that this day is finding you doing well. I want to come to you with an important little lesson to help bridge the gap on a topic and a subject that's becoming a very popular narrative right now. It could be a point or a source of confusion for a lot of people. And I think what's happening is we're not connecting the dots into the premise of this particular conversation, which is, let me go ahead and just put the title out there, the connection between the FBAs and slaves, and the slave trade, and the migration of foundational Black Americans, being the indigenous of the Americas, that being Northern and Southern America, and the islands as well. I think the main confusion and problem is, and I'm not going to belabor the time because I know people's attention spans are short, so I want to get right into it because we got a lot of information to share. I think the problem being is that the historical narratives that have been taught to us are all false, and falsehoods are being exposed, and we're seeing through the lies and through his story, and we're finding our own story. And a lot of these particular instances that we're going to discuss and that we do discuss are points of national attention because it affects the safety of people's borders and countries and what a lot of people are fighting for. Many world wars are, at the preponderance, the basis of the discussion and what's out there. So what I want to do, and there'll be many that will try and disagree. That's why I want to give you a lot of books and references to other authors so that you can do the research for yourself and find out what the connection is and not relegate it to religious epithet or dogma, but understand that the compilation known as the Bible covers a lot of history, but there have been various interpolations and reference and changes to keep you from understanding how historical portions of the documents are. Our scrolls, we would often go and our scribes would pin down the prophetic events of our sojourn as a people. And a lot of that was destroyed. Every time the temples were destroyed, they would try and destroy our books, our scrolls, our sojourn. And then it was Rome, through their religion of Christianity, that put together this compilation called the Bible through the Nicene Council in 300 and 400 AD. You didn't receive those so-called Gospels until then, when the original apostles all died out around 30 AD and 40 AD. And then they decided to pick one who never walked with our Mashiach, never met him, and never wanted to be trained by those who were trained by the Mashiach, was Shaul, Paul, which a lot of people don't know. He is often, and this my lesson is not on him, he is often misunderstood as being Simon Magus and Simon the Magician. And so, but they wanted to utilize his confusing writings, as said by Peter, to help build the foundation of the Christian church, which has turned a lot of people off from really understanding their Israelite history and understanding these scriptures and what applies to us. We must get away from religion. We must get away from Christianity. We must get away from the church and understanding our body as a temple. But let me go back to getting you to understand how the foundational Black Americans got to the Americas and the slave connection. See if we can establish some history real quick. So I'm going to get right into it. First point, we began in the scriptures with the splitting of the kingdom. The splitting of the kingdom came after King Solomon had built the temple, but he fell. King Solomon fell due to his many concubines and the worship of other gods and his women. He actually literally lost his mind. And this is you probably learned this but never made the connection. There were two kingdoms after Solomon. They were split into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. His son, Jeroboam, took over the northern kingdom, and his other son, Rehoboam, took over the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom comprised of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. The northern kingdom was comprised of the other 10 tribes that you very rarely hear mentioned. If you read the name of the book escapes me right now. There's a book that tells you the prophecies of the 12 tribes as being fathers that they were giving to their children to tell them what to expect as being that particular tribe. Patriarchs, that's it, the book about the 12 patriarchs. So we have people like brothers like Reuben and Gad and Simeon and Naphtali, just to name a few. These comprise of the 10 tribes that had gone on prior to the Southern Kingdom. Southern Kingdom, this particular split, this all happened in 975 BC. Now, what I want you to understand is when you think about that, the 10 tribes left the other 2 tribes and they split and went separate ways. These were a family of people. These were brothers and their children, nephews, cousins. They went a separate way. This was close to 1,000 years before the birth of Yahushua HaMashiach, before he came around. So primarily we find that when Mashiach came around, he was dealing with the southern kingdom. Because when you think about the Feast of Weeks, which we know as the day of Pentecost now, those who were well off financially within the 10 tribes that were scattered abroad in other lands would sojourn back to Israel every year for these high holy days and festivals. And these were the people that were comprised or compassed about during Pentecost when Apostle Peter and the rest of those of Judean descent came out of the upper room and began to prophesy after the filling of the Holy Spirit. These people had migrated for the festivals. So many of the well-off would sojourn back. You have to know that it was by boat. Don't forget, we were the understanders and master craftsmen of seafaring and the seas and maritime because we got it from Father Noah, who got it directly from heaven on how to put ships together. So this is also going to come up as we find out how the Southern Kingdom got to the Americas in their sojourn. So during the split, we find out that after the split in 975 BC, about 200 years later in 720 BC, we have Assyria defeating the northern kingdom and placing them in exile. And then after that, maybe another 200-300 years in 586 BC, Judah, the southern kingdom, goes into exile by Babylon. So there's 7 captivities, and we're in the 7th, soon to come to an end now. Let me see if I can break this down to you. And let me side note, very important books. I'll tell you after it. Let me stick with this timeline. Then I got a few books I want you to write down and reference. This particular reference is we were first in Egyptian captivity. However, the split happened after Egyptian captivity in 975 BC, and we separated from our brothers and our cousins and went separate ways. First, Northern Kingdom goes to Assyria, and then we don't come back together until American captivity. What happens with the Southern Kingdom? They go into captivity in Babylon, Persia, Greek captivity with Alexander the Great. It was around 332 BC. And then we went into Roman captivity during the time of Herod. And then American captivity, which began in 1619 AD, which is when the merging, believe it or not, of the tribes took place again. And the brothers came back together. There was a merging. So what am I trying to say? I can almost sum up this whole lesson by saying this. Foundational Black Americans, you're right. People who believe in the transatlantic slave trade, you're right. We're all right, but we have half rights that need to come together, and we need to make the connection and bring together the merge. There was also the sub-Saharan slave trade that was taking place, and that was primarily Judah, but we'll get to that in a minute. because the reason the sub-Saharan slave trade is not talked about much, because the the Chinese don't want to be implicated with their dynasties as having had slaves. India, they don't want to be implicated for having had slaves that they purchased from the Arabs. The Arabs were slave traders for the sub-Saharan slave trade. It wasn't just the Jews, the Khazars, and the Spanish, and the Catholic Church and the Romans. They took place in the transatlantic slave trade. That's the one they participated in primarily. But as far as those going to the Mediterranean and the Middle East and parts of Asia and up into Russia, that would be the sub-Saharan slave trade. I digress. Let's talk about the Northern Kingdom before they make their descent into the Americas. As they were in Assyrian captivity, there was a lot of mixing of races during that time with the Northern Kingdom, because when Assyria took them into captivity, they began to interbreed with them. And we're going to find out there's a lot of interbreeding, which the Most High speaks against, because he created the nations he wanted created. And then we take it upon ourselves to disobey him and go outside of our own kind and create another race, other nations. So they were trying to conquer and divide and defeat by breeding, crossbreeding with them. However, what took place was during the Assyrian captivity, we find that the Assyrians decide to let the northern kingdom go during 720 BC. And we find this in 2nd Esdras, the 13th chapter. And I'm going to start. 2nd Esdras, the 13th chapter, is one of the most foundational chapters to help you understand the sojourn of the Hebrew history sojourn. And what's happened, what's happening, and what's going to happen is found in 2nd Esdras, the 13th chapter, which you can find in the Apocrypha. Let me read a little bit of this. What Ezra saw in a vision was the coming of Yahushua HaMashiach. 13 and 33, it said, and when all the people hear his voice, Yahushua, every man shall in their own land leave the battle. The civil war and the racial war that's going on now is going to escalate, and there will be nations against nation, as it mentions in verse 31. Nations against nations, people against people, and realm, spiritual against realm. We have the fallen angels fighting against the Most High's angels that are sent here to protect his creation and his people. There's also a war in the spirit taking place. So it says in verse 34, and an innumerable multitude shall be gathered together as thou sawest them willing to come and to overcome him, Yahushua HaMashiach, by fighting him, Armageddon. That's what we see. But it says, but in verse 35, he shall stand upon the top of Mount Zion. Now listen to verse 36, this is key. Because Zion is not just a mountain. Zion also comprises of a people, which is in reference to the northern kingdom. We are the children of Zion. We are Zion. Not to be confused with Zionists. It says in verse 36, and Zion shall come and shall be showed to all men. All men will see that we are gathered with our Savior who's come to save us. Because it says when we see him, we shall be as he is, for we all shall be changed. The dead in Christ shall rise first, and we which are alive and remain shall be called up to be with him. And so we will be showed to all the people that will gather together to fight Yahushua when he stands on Zion. He will gather us because Judah and Benjamin will fight with him against the people, but he's going to slay them with his word. I digress. Let me skip ahead in 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter, in verse 40. It says, verse 39, after he has destroyed these people, it says, and whereas thou sawest that he gathered together another peaceable multitude unto him. Verse 40 says, and those are the 10 tribes, which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Oshea the king, whom Salmanaser, the king of Assyria, led away. Right there is your key to the fact that he said that when he comes back to gather us, he's going to gather the southern kingdom first in Judah, then he's going to gather the northern kingdom, and then this second Esdras goes on to describe who the northern kingdom is, and those that were carried away by Assyria in 720 BC, and that went into exile. But now listen to what Ezra is shown that the northern kingdom did during the time of captivity with Assyria. Verse 41. It says, King Assyria led them captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. That was a breakdown of the fact that they were taken away from Assyria and taken over the waters and put into another land. People, this is the migrating and dispersing of the 12 tribes of Israel that they told you were lost your entire life, and it's right here in the Apocrypha. Verse 41 says, the northern kingdom, but they took this counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathens and go forth into a further country, not to go forth into Africa. Keep listening. It said, where never a mankind dwelt. They went into lands no man ever lived in before. Africa was already populated, so it couldn't have been Africa. I digress. Verse 42. They wanted to leave that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. And they entered into the Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river, for the Most High then showed signs for them, and he held still the floods till they had passed over the waters. He held back the waters again like he did when they came out of Egypt. He did it when they came out of Syria. It tells you right here, so that they could get to these other lands. 45, for through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. It took them a year and a half to get to these other lands. It took them a year and a half. Most people try to calculate it and say there's no way they could have done it, but you're totally skipping the fact that the Most High's hand was in this, and he was holding back the floods, the waters, the waves, the roaring waves, the billows. He made it an easy year and a half for the northern kingdom to get to the other lands. Are you listening to me, foundational Black Americans? Yes, the indigenous of all these lands originated from the northern kingdom that migrated into other parts of the world that they might be able to keep their king commandments, which is why we find and they hide artifacts that are Hebraic artifacts showing the language and the 10 Commandments, and horns and shofar's horns and feathers that you would see Gad, that he would have those feathers as well. But they don't want you putting the connection between the fact that there are pyramids in Southern America, Northern America, what the Grand Canyon is all about, and Paleo-Hebrew, but I digress. Let me go back to 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter, which is explaining how the northern kingdom began to go into other countries after leaving their captivity in Syria, that they might there keep their statutes, which they couldn't keep in Syria in their own land. And they entered the Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river, for the Most High then showed signs for them, and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. And the same region is also called Arsareth. There's your point of contention, because it doesn't say America or Babylon, so everyone wants to fight over the name Arsareth. Look it up in the Jewish Encyclopedia. I'll have a reference in 1 second. Let me finish reading this. Then dwelt they there until the latter times. He's saying, Esdras in verse 46, they're dwelling in these different indigenous places and countries until the end, when back to verse 40, they shall be gathered by Yahusha as a peaceable multitude. Back to verse 47. The highest shall stay the springs of the stream again when he brings them back, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. But those that be left behind of thy people, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, are they that are found within my borders. Who is in the borders and stayed there? The southern kingdom. Verse 49. Now, when he destroyeth the multitude of the nations, Armageddon, that are gathered together, he shall defend his people that remain, southern kingdom, before the gathering of the northern. And then he shall show them great wonders. And that's it for that. I want you to see something. Then I'm going to give you a timeline. Yes, foundational Black Americans and the slave, those that are slaves, are the children of Yasharel, Israelites. The Khazars bought the whole Jewish franchise in the 8th century to distinguish themselves from their Christian and Muslim neighbors. They did not want to become Christian or Muslims, so they took over the franchise, knowing we had fled in exile. The Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom had been thrown into slavery. We're going to talk about that in a second. So Ashkenazi Israeli Jews have no connection to ancient Hebrews. We are the ancient Hebrews, the indigenous of all the lands around the world, and the Southern Kingdom that went into slavery. They are Khazars. The Bolshevik Revolution was revenge for the Kievan Rus destruction of the Khazarian Empire in 965 AD. So remember, they began to mass convert in the 8th century. The Khazars were a people, because of their religious practices, that had been kicked out of 104 countries. And every time they go into a country, they would try to assimilate, change their names, and blend in, but would rob, kill, and plunder the places they were at. They were ran out. So they finally took on the identity of the true ancient Hebrew Israelites. Lose your mind from religion and those YouTubers and those camps right now, because it's really not about that. It's about a people that represent the Most High, that are the original and the indigenous. Here's what I want you to hear as well before we get to dumb diverses and the Catholic Church instituting these various different practices of slavery. What I want you to see is Arsareth. The name of the land beyond the great river was far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of restoration that we just read in 2nd Ezra, the 13th chapter. They will remain in these indigenous lands. There's a book that you should read called Lost Tribes in the Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders. Lost Tribes in the Promised Lands by Ronald Sanders, which also talks about this migration. It's a firsthand scholarship account of the various movements and migrations of the Northern and Southern Kingdom. They tried at one point to price this book out of the market for $1,400, but I think it's affordable now for $77 on Amazon. Now, until the time of restoration, this is also according to 2nd Ezra 13, 4th Esdras, the 13th chapter and 45th verse. And this states, and I'm reading, let me let you know where I'm reading this from. It's called the Jewish Encyclopedia by Morris Jastrow Jr. and Kaufman Kohler, the converts. And what it tells you is that Columbus identified America with this land, Arsareth. And you can see that in KAYSERLINGS' Christopher Columbus book, translated by Dr. C. Gross on page 15. Columbus went back and told the Queen, I need financing because I've located the lost tribes of Israel and I found another land that we can conquer and conquest. The land was already filled with the 10 tribes. The Northern Kingdom were already populating and working and growing the land. Once again, It's a book by Christopher Columbus. They even put it in the movie Christopher Columbus, that he read 2nd Esdras 13 and said, I think I know where to find these people, because they wanted to conquer and destroy the people. You need to understand that in Africa, when they were trying to capture the Southern Kingdom, they knew who they were looking for. They weren't looking for the Hamites, the Hamitic tribes. They were looking for the tribes that were once in high esteem and ruled the world, that had gotten on the bad side of their God, the Most High Yah, for breaking the statutes, laws, and commandments. Even the Northern Kingdom said, we want to leave Syria and find another land where we can keep the commandments, because they weren't keeping it after Egyptian captivity and into Assyrian captivity. They knew that's what led them into captivity, their disobedience, as we hear talked about in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. Another very important book is A View of the Hebrews. Please get this book. Please get this book, View of the Hebrews by Ethan Smith. And it talks about other explorers that came to the lands before Columbus that knew we were over there, and how we were migrating, working the land, tilling the land, etc. It's called View of the Hebrews by Ethan Smith. Very important book. And then there's also, which has been out since the 70s, which I'm getting ready to read a few excerpts from, is From Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor. Very important piece of information and history. Let me make sure I'm not skipping nothing. So we talked about the Columbus movie, and we got into that. Let me get into this Babylon to Timbuktu. And then we'll talk about what happened with the Southern Kingdom. And before I get into Babylon to Timbuktu, I want you to see timelines and put it all together, because there's so many intersections that are taking place. So many different intersections. From Babylon to Timbuktu, you find that the reason they were coming after the Southern Kingdom that had been separated from the Northern Kingdom, we were at odds with each other anyway. The two sticks shall come back together. The Southern Kingdom maintained within the borders all the way till the time of Mashiach, Yahushua HaMashiach. And they were not driven out of the borders until 70 AD. Rome came, and we began to flee into Portugal, Spain, and parts of Western Africa, bringing our customs and interbreeding with the Hamitic Africans. When a male who was an Israelite bred with an Hamite, they produced what is known as a Bantu. When an Israelite woman, a Hebrew Israelite woman, would breed with an African Hamitic descent person, that is what was known in Africa as a Nilote. A Nilote. Now, what I want you to take into consideration is that this took place from 70 AD until the time of transatlantic slave trade, which began towards the 1500s. We're talking over 1,300 years that the Israelites moved around, hiding from Rome and the Romans and Alexander the Great all throughout Africa. And then we find out also that Spain and Portugal transported Hebrew Israelites from Spain and Portugal and put them into captivity in an island called Santa May on the coast of the Angola. So it was southwestern Africa that they were enslaved. Why were they enslaved? Because they would not accept Christianity and be baptized. They were trying to keep Hebrew customs, and they forbade it. And we're going to read and find out that it was the Catholic Church, and we're going to find out which popes and all of them, that the Catholic Church gave these people like King Leopold and the Americas the power to say, you can take, steal, rob, plunder, and enslave these people, because of the amount of hatred they had for us, because they were too busy trying to create a religion that spawned from Hebrew beliefs, from the original Hebrew Israelites that walked with Hamashiach, saw him die and raise up from the grave, and walked up under the original 12 apostles until the time of their horrific deaths. So they wanted to kill those people off, bring in their church fathers, alter the course of the understanding of religion we had that the Nazarenes kept, the Essenes kept, the Ebionites kept. You don't even hear about these sects anymore. They were staunch keepers of the laws and commandments. They wanted to wipe them all out and off the land. And those that fled Israel in 70 AD, they stalked them until they could chase them down and kill them off, and then take over what was known as the so-called church that was given over to James, Yahushua's brother, and Peter worked along with him. They created a whole nother narrative and made Peter a pope, said he was the first pope, and created a whole nother religion and wanted us wiped off the face of the earth. So they came after us. Listen to this in From Babylon to Timbuktu on page 90. It says the Hebrews, the black Jews, had an advantage over the African tribes. Why? Because they carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization because of the stability of the black Jewish culture. The Jews were not absorbed into the autochthonous population. In fact, the Jews, the Hebrews, absorbed some of the native tribes. So we proselyted a lot of the native tribes. They wanted to take on our customs and cultures. That would be your Nilotes and your Bantus. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters, art, goldsmiths, leatherworkers, potters, armorers, sattlers, blacksmiths, agriculturalists, etc. Now you see why they want to enslave these people? Because they were a skilled, gifted people. They had skills. They were the children of the Most High. They were the chosen ones. These who wanted to be superior wanted them dead. And the Africans and Nilotes were envious of them because they had so much culture. They built cities. This took place in Africa for 1,300 years. We are not African Americans. Just let that sink in for 1 second. These were a cultured people. They were kings. You have to think about this. This was black nobility. This was Hebrew Israelite nobility. This was a bloodline that they were trying to destroy. I think I'm going to leave it there. That was page 90. I'll read a few more excerpts from Babylon to Timbuktu. Let's look at, got a few more. I got so much information I want you to see. We're making the connection. Page 78 from Babylon to Timbuktu. By the time the prophet Zephaniah, about 630 BC, Ethiopia and the adjacent lands of Uganda and Kenya were swarming with black Jews. Zephaniah says, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering." This verse is an indication that the Israelites would be multiplying and making converts among the inhabitants beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. No doubt this prophet had communication with the Jews in this remote area. So we see excerpts in this book talking about how they took over Ethiopia, Egypt. Come on, think about it. As far as Egypt, our Messiah went and hid down there with Mary and Joseph when he was first born to hide from King Herod, who was killing the firstborn sons. Moses blended in with them and became a great man in Pharaoh's house. So we were going all throughout Africa. And then, of course, Spain and Portugal, but we ran into a lot of problems in Spain and Portugal. They pretty much hated us like everybody else. And we're going to get to that real quick in a second. I could go on and on, but you should get this book for yourself and read it. As I said, you keep talking about that canal. Well, the thing about it is that the land of Ham and what's also known as Negro land, what's known as Africa, what's also known as, it escapes me the other popular name. It'll come back to me. It starts with the A. Al, Al, Albuquerque. Albuquerque. Before they built the Suez Canal, you have to understand that what's known as Israel and the Middle East, all of that came about during a later time. That's a man-made Suez Canal, which still had an isthmus that you can pass through, an aisle that they left at the very top. But that whole land was connected. So when we migrated out of Egypt, we went through that land before there was a Suez Canal, when we crossed those rivers. Now let's get ready to get into the expulsion of the Jews out of Spain. Give me one second. Yeah, I'm not going to read that. I'll let you read that for yourself. Babylon to Timbuktu on page 115, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal. It was AD 1492, January 2nd, when the Moorish stronghold of Granada surrendered to the armies of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. For the first time since the year 711, all of Spain was in Christian hands, and there was a decree to expel Jews from Spain, and it was signed on March 31st in one of the corridors of the great Alhambra, the palace of the Moorish kings of Granada. Let me read this timeline to you so I can explain to you the papal bull papers. So when we look at the timeline, we have the Holy Roman Empire, which had started taking place because they were trying to come against black nobility that was in Europe, that was in Great Britain, Scotland, even parts of Russia. All of that was built up was ran by Moors and black nobility, great bloodlines of the noble ones. King James was a black man. We'll talk about that later. He was trying to hurry up and composite an edit of the compilation known as the Bible before he was chased out of his nobility because of the Spanish Inquisition. When we look at timelines and we talk about the papal bull papers, Moors ruled Spain and Portugal for a moment until 1490, and then they were conquered because we had Greece and the Roman Empire coming in. Around the time of 1450, the papal bull papers were released called the Dum Diversas, and it authorized a conquest and it also authorized slavery. Catholic Church took it upon themselves to give authorization to control, conquer, and enslave the chosen ones. Romanist pontifex authorized conquest of slavery at that time too. Later in 1480, the papal bull authorized the Spanish Inquisition, which was to chase people out of the rest of the remaining lands. Let's not forget, we're strictly dealing with the Southern Kingdom. Northern Kingdom, our brothers and sisters, they weren't subject to what was going on here. They were in another land and wouldn't have to worry about conquest and slavery until Columbus came. And also, don't believe this stuff about slavery and the boats dropping off people in the Caribbean islands and then like it was a cruise ship. No, it didn't happen like that. The Caribbean islands were the Northern Kingdom. They had already migrated into South America and filled up South America and North America 1,000 years ago and had been there and had prospered greatly. That's why the people in Haiti were so strong and able to fight back. The Southern Kingdom that came in 1619, they went straight to Point Comfort, Virginia in 1619. And they came from the west coast of Africa out of Ghana. But slaves were originally sent down to, as I mentioned, Saint Tome, because they were expelled from Spain around the 1500s. In 1490, Jews expelled from Spain. and exploration of the New World begins. They begin trying to find the Northern Kingdom and to find new lands. We were also expelled from Portugal and placed on West Africa, and then around 1500 is when the transatlantic slave trade began. Papal Bull Papers. Let me read this for you. Told you I'm trying to hurry. Got a lot of information to cover. Where's this at? Give me 1 second. Bear with me. Here we go. Known as the dumb diverses. See if I can read this. Okay, there we go. The dumb diverses, Dumdivers, and the Papal Bull Papers, one and the same. It's a papal bull issued on the 18th of June, 1452, by Pope Nicholas the 10th, the 5th, I'm sorry. It authorized Alfonso the 5th of Portugal to conquer Saracens and pagans and consign them to perpetual servitude. Pope Calixtus III reiterated the papal bull papers in 1456 with Inter Caetera, not to be confused with Alexander VI bull of the same title, and which was renewed by Pope Sixtus IV in 1481, Pope Leo. So it's all these popes that are enacting slavery. It's the Catholic Church that gave other lands and nations that stole our heritage and religion and just stole all of it, just replacement theology, that started saying, now put these people in slavery. And I'm telling you, it's as simple as black and white. And I mean that. It was go get the melanated people, because there's a new type of people in the earth that are non-melanated that are trying to conquer and divide because of racial superiority. I'll just tell it like it is. I don't have time to play with it. Precise denotions, especially the English description. The concept of the consignment of exclusive spheres of influence to certain nation states was extended to the Americas in 1493 by Pope Alexander VI. And it pretty much said you can go in and take their land, everything they own. This is the Catholic Church giving people the right to come in and hang us and lynch us and kill us and destroy us. I could read more from this, but I just want to cover the basic information because this is getting long and drawn out. But make sure you go to page 115 and From Babylon to Timbuktu. And then you can also Google dumb diverses and papal bull papers to understand the slave decree, and then understand the Spanish Inquisition, and then understand the Christian wars. Christianity was murdering people. Either convert to being a Christian and be baptized or die fighting against Muslims. So this was 200 years later, around 1619, that we see the Southern Kingdom connects back with the Northern Kingdom, foundational Black Americans, in 1619 when we hit Point Comfort. And what was taking place? The Indians had been working the lands and were breeding in Northern America with those that came over the Bering Strait, known as Siberians. We know later about them trying to wash them away by having what was known as $5 Indians. But that didn't come until after the Civil War, around the Civil War time, because they did not want these blacks to inherit the land of the Americans after Columbus had conquered. They made their conquests and had taken over the land and had them as slaves. That's where they came from. But the original copper-toned Northern Kingdom Indians that were here, we worked with those Siberians that were here. And then we ended up connecting, and they enslaved the Northern Kingdom along with the Southern Kingdom that came on the boats. So you're both right. Don't say, where's the slave ships? There were no slave ships. There was a great documentary shown on Netflix called The Descendant. And it showed that they found that the last slave ship was found hidden in Alabama around 1860, and they had sank it. And the name of that slave ship was called the Clotilda. Decades after slavery, they found that one ship. So if you see this one was sunk and destroyed and blown up, what do you think they did with the other slave ships? The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, and the slave ship that was named Jesus. They destroyed these ships because slavery became illegal and they didn't want any residue of the facts. Why do you think they changed history? To alter you knowing that Thanksgiving was originally intended to worship their slaughter of the Northern Kingdom Indians and then try to create a whole nother type of Indians. Brothers and sisters, there's always been replace, replace, replace. Satan hates the children of Yah. So there's replacement theology. They wanted to replace who was originally here. We were originally in the Americas, we're the indigenous. They lied to us. It wasn't just slavery. That was only Judah and Benjamin who came in 1619 because they remained in the borders because they had to fulfill the prophecy and walk with the Messiah. And 2,000 years prior, our people left Assyria, 720 BC, and began to search out the lands with boats. And they've been hiding the artifacts your entire life, that all of the indigenous of the entire world were all of the Northern Kingdom. Yeah, all of Thailand. You'll find indigenous people in China, Japan, Thailand, Iraq, Iran. Uh, there was a document. What was that we were watching? Oh, there's a guy who likes to travel and go to different countries and lands where the indigenous are, and he was in Thailand, and he asked the lady about her God, an elderly lady, and who they worship, and she said Yahoo.
Yahoo. She didn't speak English, but she knew the name of the God she worshipped was Yahoo.
And the Cherokees and the Choctaws, they would all call on the name of Yah because they were saying Haya. And Haya, as we know, not Ahaya, because that's not his name. His name is Yahuwah. They would say Yah, Yah for short, because we see that in Psalm 68:4. Yah. So they would say Haya, which is meaning to lift up higher, and the breath of the Holy Spirit, the Ruach. So there you have it. I just wanted to come and help you to understand where at biblically, no religion, no fake Bible theologians or seminaries. No, understanding the history and the language of the history that's in a book that shadows the sojourn of our people and lets you see the connectivity. It was the northern and southern kingdom coming back together. We are together in slavery, but we're scattered throughout the world, and we were enslaved throughout the world because the Catholic Church gave the decree for every nation and country to hate on us. Psalms 83 told us that they would be confederate against us and to make us nothing, which is why we are a byword in every country all over this land, as Deuteronomy 28 said it would happen. In Psalms 83, they said they come together. Once Israel was wiped out because they were so gifted and talented, all these other nations, countries, and races became enriched. They took all the gold out of Solomon's temple. The Most High is coming back to get his gold. It is said that some of the gold that Saddam Hussein had, no, not Saddam, Gaddafi had, was from Solomon's temple. And when Hillary Clinton authorized that raid, they went in and took all of his wealth and riches because they wanted to plunder the gold that he had. The same thing is still happening today, brothers and sisters. So let's not fight over what is right, because both sides of the parties that are talking about FBAs and slavery are right. And we got to come together and come back to the statutes, laws, and commandments. We were the Moors. We were black nobility. King James, his throne was taken by the British white monarchy that came in and took over that throne. And then they were copying us. All the way from our big hit, big uh, big behind women that would wear those dresses in England and London, and then the other races come in trying to copy us and put these little fake buttocks underneath their dresses. They were doing that stuff way back then, trying to mock our race and who we are as a people. Serious race war, as spoken of in 2nd Ezra 13th chapter. It's going to transpire. It's not only one who can help us is the Most High, and we got to come together as a people and understand how this is all connected. And that's my take on the connection between FBAs and slavery. It's not even my take. I gave you books. Please go study the books. Go do your research. Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph R. Windsor. Ethan Smith, A View of the Hebrews. The Apocrypha, 2nd Ezra 13. Papal Bull Papers. Please look that up. Go watch the documentary called The Descendant on Netflix and hear about and find out that the Clotilda existed. Stop listening to these people talking about there's no slave ships. There are. That's just totally insane. And then understand these timelines. Fathom in your mind the thousands of years between each of these events I just described to you. I mean, 1,300 years in Africa as a nation after being ran out of Jerusalem by Rome, who later uh, took it back through the Rothschilds, who gave it to the Khazars, who converted in the 8th century and told them to go chase the Palestinians out because of a Balfour Agreement, which expired 2 years ago, which is what ensued prior to this war that's going on over there now, because the Balfour contract expired. So they knew they weren't going to sign another contract. So they was like, okay, now it's time for us to commit genocide and destroy the Palestinians. And that's what's transpiring right now. We're nearing the end, brothers and sisters, and the end signifies the collection of the tribes, the resurrection of the Ark of the Covenant, and us going into the land. And prior to that happening, everyone will know that we are the children of the Most High before Yahushua puts his foot on Zion. It's been my time. Remember this, that the only for sure obstacle to truth is to think that you already have it, because truth is a journey, not a destination. Shalom.